Hello everyone and welcome to a special episode of SUGTalks. You might be thinking you've accidentally opened the wrong SAP podcast, but today I will be your guest host. I'm Gerren Mayne and you may already know me from my own podcast, SAPCHAT. I've been invited by the user group to find out a little more about the organisation. Before doing so, please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Today I've got two guests joining me, one of which you'll definitely be familiar with as I'm turning the tables on him. Craig Dale, CEO of the UK&I SAP User Group and the usual host of this podcast. And Paul Cooper, Chairman of the UK&I SAP User Group and Head of IS at Burton's Biscuit company. On today's podcast, we'll actually be taking a closer look at the UK&I SAP User Group itself, with a focus on its vision for the year ahead and what can be expected from 2022. So, I believe it's customary, Craig, at this point to ask an icebreaker question. Yeah, get ready. So given that I'm the guest host, I thought I'd ask you this. If you could interview anyone from your life, living or dead, but not a celebrity, who would it be and why? So I think for me, it would be a guy called Don McCullen, who's a documentary photographer. He did a lot of work in the 60s and 70s and 80s of kind of sort of deprived areas of cities, London, and through the whole of the country. And he did a lot of documentary photography in Vietnam. And he's just got a habit of he could take a box brownie camera and make amazing images out of it. So for me, having a cup of tea with him and getting some tips would be wonderful. How about you, Craig?
Oh, wow. Thanks, Gerren. And welcome to the podcast as host. And, please be gentle.
Oh, Craig.
Too late for that.
Yeah.
I think for me, it would be my dad. He passed away almost 17 years ago. And I think I'd just love to have the opportunity of one more conversation with him, just to see how, he would see things now. He's got two great-grandchildren he hasn't met, etc. And I think that for me, that comes to mind pretty much immediately. My dad.
Yeah, I think you're in really good company there. Paul, how about you?
I think for me, I had an aunt who sadly died 3 or 4 years ago now, who was blind and had the use of a guide dog for all of her adult life and lived a very full life, working, going to work with the dog and all of those sorts of things. And I did the eulogy at her funeral. And I'd kind of like to just talk to her about some of the things that I said at the funeral in terms of some of my kind of observations and things like that. So, yeah, whilst I'd never lived that close to her, she was a big part of kind of all the family's life just because of the sort of character she was and so on.
Well, both fantastic answers, if you don't mind me saying, as guest host. But we need to move on to the main topic of conversation. And we're going to be discussing the UK&I SAP User Group vision. And I'd like to start off with asking you, why does the user group exist?
I think for me, it was really brought home to me what the user group is about, sat on our stand at our conference in November. And a quiet moment for me, I was kind of catching up with a work email and suddenly kind of the noise of people talking to each other about their experiences with SAP and partners and tools that they were using, and just kind of catching very small snippets of conversations as people walk past that I, may or may not have known each other, pre-Sunday evening, but it's that hubbub of noise, that positivity that was in the room on that afternoon, that collaboration, that networking, people willing to share. And it's about bringing a community like that together alongside, like yourself from the partner community and the SAP space, but people who've got a mutual interest in making things better in their organization. and how we as a user group can help facilitate that and make that work is the real nub, I think, for where we exist or why we exist as a user group.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you look at that in our reason for existence, if you like, that creating that one vibrant SAP community that you mentioned there, Paul, that you can see at the conference, and taking that community, learning and developing together, and speaking together and speaking with one voice. We're an independent SAP community, providing that platform for members to communicate with the whole of the SAP community. We offer value-adding services and drive the future development of SAP's products and services as well through what we can give back as that community. So I really do think that, we're here for the SAP community, bringing that community together and helping drive success in that community.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm with Paul. I was at Connect this year, and it was really special getting there on Sunday. There was an element of feeling like you'd been let out of prison for a long, the first time in a long time. Not I say that I've been in prison, but it was just the fact that you realise at that point that there's lots of things you can do with technology, but you can't replace meeting people face to face and that general atmosphere.
I think that's right, because at the time as well, when you think about it, I think Omicron had first reared its head, and we had Storm Arwen. So everybody who actually got there had battled not just the pandemic, but also the weather as well. And it was just, it was a great feeling having everybody together.
Well, look, moving on to some of my kind of main questions. One of the questions I'd like to ask is, what is the UKISUG's core vision that you all work towards? From
what kind of alluded to a little earlier, our vision overall is to drive success for the SAP community. Creating unrivaled resources, education, and advocacy. And when we look at what we provide and how we get to that vision, the value falls within our community. That a fantastic community, the knowledge resides in that community. We're able to facilitate such a wide range of resources and nurture that knowledge to aid with any queries and questions about SAP, whether that's from customers, partners, and even SAP themselves when they're wanting to, if you like, interrogate the community to help them go forward as well. And I think that does provide a vital resource for members.
Absolutely. And Paul, you?
I would, magnify what Craig said, and I think that community element. And how we drive that through, the elements that Craig talked to about in terms of the vision and the success of organisations. SAP talks more about customer success now than probably at any time that I've worked in this space. It was traditionally about, implementations and projects, and their language has changed to talk about customer success. And, that's where we've always been. So, whilst Craig, is articulating the vision, and we did a lot of work on redefining our vision last year, it wasn't a revolution. This was just, continuing the evolution of us as an organisation and restating some things like that. So, that for me is the important bit. Is we're on a journey alongside our members and the partners and affiliates in SAP who, and together as that community. Ultimately, if our members are not successful, then SAP and the partners will not be successful. So, we're right at the heart of that.
Absolutely. I know that you use the acronym ICE for investment, community and environment, but what does each of those mean when it comes to your members? Paul?
I think for me, one of the things that we've been able to develop over the last few years as a user group is not just our SAP focus. It's been supporting our members during the pandemic. It's about, environmental things that we can do. We're hosting a very large conference, so, we've got that piece there. So we've got the community and investment. And the other thing that I think as a user group, we perhaps don't talk about as much is that pride in having created, a number of very good jobs in in what was or still is, and probably the government, would be talking about, the Teesside area in kind of the levelling up. But we've created what I would describe as proper jobs, not kind of call centre entry level roles. And we've developed some really good people through there, and we've seen them, move on. So the ICE initiative to me is bringing all of the other elements of the user group together that make for a successful organisation in terms of, our commitments around sustainability, our commitments around investment and community and so on. I don't know what you'd add there, Craig, as well.
Yeah, and I think that, sums up quite a big part of what we're doing there. And, well-being forms a big part of the community element as well. One of the things we quickly identified when we went into the first lockdown in 2020 through the COVID pandemic was some of our members were struggling, and we kind of identified it internally first as some of our staff were struggling. So we started to, enact things that made it easier for them, and then started to think, well, if we're affected by this, then everybody's probably affected by this. So we created a wellbeing program, and I know Simon Nichols of Thrive. We created a partnership with Thrive to really help and focus on wellbeing, positive mental health, and did that for our members, and we've continued to do that, and it remains a focal part of our our program. Also, diversity, inclusivity. We launched the Women in SAP community at the end of last year. We have sustainability community, as Paul mentioned, and we've just creating that community now. And I think when you look at these kind of initiatives, you would see, a normal organisation perhaps having people, planet and profit, whereas, we're all about community, environment and reinvestment. Should we make any surplus, we reinvest that into the community, into developing and making that community better for our members.
Yeah, and I know from the Connect conference that Simon and the Thrive and the Wellbeing work that you did, that got really pulled out and raised as something that was quite special and was really appreciated by the members. So I think everyone was in absolute violent agreement that it was an excellent initiative. You mentioned, Craig, there women in SAP as part of the diversity and inclusion under community. Do you have many plans for the year ahead, given the push on the issue in 2021?
Yeah, we've got lots of plans in. We've got a full program of events that we have in planning at the moment. We have a specific webinar topic that is being led by two of our board members, Fiona and Cheryl, and I think that's coming up in next week or the week after. Because what we're in the process of at the moment is we have a number of positions available on the user group board, and we run an election. And one of the key things we wanted to share with the community is what it means to be part of that board. And Fiona and Cheryl will be sharing their thoughts and looking to drive more of the female members of our community onto that to again keep pushing that message. We have lots of mentor sessions planned in the diary. We're looking at doing a women-specific speaker training session as we get to the mid part of this year, to really focus on that and help our lady members really feel confident in putting themselves forward to speak at our events. So there's lots of plans, all leading up to, again, the conference at the end of November.
Good. And Paul, any comments for you on that one?
I think, as a board, we recognise that quite often stood on the stage at an event like our conference and speaking, in terms of the main speakers, it's predominantly male, and we need to play our part to help knock down those barriers, etc. So, it's important to us. We've got, within the membership, a good mix of people, but not good enough. Yeah. So, that we're not hitting 50-50 in terms of speakers in breakout sessions, etc. We acknowledge we need to do more, and hence, what Craig talked about in terms of driving that forward.
Yeah, and as we know, it is a kind of an industry that probably is male dominant, and SAP are doing their bit. We are trying to do our bit to really try and help. And I know the partner community, and we have quite a lot of the partner community involved in our Women in SAP community as well, which hopefully will drive that message through. And as we move on, perhaps we'll create even more communities to increase that diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And as working for a partner as well, that is a huge focus and a number of initiatives to try to help. And so I think on all fronts, hopefully we'll start to see a big improvement there. I'd like to ask you what you think the biggest challenges are facing your members at the moment, and how is the user group looking to help them to be addressed? Paul, what's your view?
I think for me, there's a number of large challenges. There's clearly, deadlines rearing their head in the future around, undertaking your journey to the cloud and S4 and so on. There's a big piece there. Skills in terms of the capability of the partner community to support the member community to get there. Are there enough consultants if all the customers leave it to the last 2 to 3 years to do their upgrades? What will happen? Demographics, I think, there's an awful lot of people who started their careers in SAP as, middle managers, I guess, at the time, who were moved into SAP projects from a business perspective or IT on the IT side. And they're in that 10-year window where they're starting to look at their retirement plans and so on. So there's a demographic piece there. And I would argue that if you come to go to an SAP event like our event, or some of the ones that the partners run and SAP run, the age is at the more mature end. If you go to kind of a more cloud-focused conference, there is a younger crew there, and we need to be attracting the right people into this aspect of the industry, whether it be line of business focus for SAP or the technical side of SAP, through apprenticeships and the right opportunities in member organizations and partner community, SAP, etc. So for me, those are kind of the key bigger challenges on a day-to-day basis. As as someone responsible for an SAP platform, there's we're rapidly approaching year end. If people have got payroll, they'll be scratching their heads at the moment about when to do their patching. Have they done their testing? There's those kind of run of the mill yearly, monthly, daily activities, security, project governance and those sorts of things. So there's this kind of level of the business as usual things that you have to do. And then there's these larger strategic decisions about S4HANA. How are you going to staff that internally? How are you going to run your change management processes and training processes for that? And that's even without using the word RISE.
And not in a baking context.
Yeah, that's right. And on that note, Craig, what's your view?
Yeah, I would agree with Paul in all of he's said there, and just kind of looking at what we're doing and how we're helping members. So if you think about that journey to S4, there's lots of different questions and challenges our members have, and last year we released a white paper at the end of the year around about the cost of change, looking at that change management question and what hidden costs of change are there. What do you need to be thinking about? How do you need to manage the change within your business to enable this to work? The end of 2020, we released a paper on skills and that skills gap, and again, how you need to be looking in your business to ensure that you can attract, train, retain, and develop the right skills within your business to again aid you on that journey. And that's a big question, because obviously if customers are looking to stay with SAP in the long term, they're going to need to be thinking about S4 if they're not already. And I think the majority of them are. Our member surveys tells us that the vast majority are going to be moving. And like Paul said, if everybody leaves it to the final few years, it's going to be almost like a mad gold rush. And then the resources to take people there are going to be like gold. So we need to work as a community, help, and if you like, highlight some of the challenges that are here now and perhaps here in the future to help our members get there successfully and hopefully with as little pain as possible.
I think that the important thing to kind of also bring out is in terms of the range of events that we run, and if I look at the conference as well, where people kind of said to me, what were the big messages or the big highlights of the conference? Actually, for us as a member organisation, we've got members at very different stages in their ownership or their project life cycle, etc. And therefore, we're about trying to educate people about S4 that are thinking about going on S4. And like Craig said, talking about, the cost of change white paper versus people that are already at S4 and running sessions, on, how to get your best from that. And you multiply that out by, special interest groups on supply chain, enterprise architecture, and so on. We're covering a huge amount of ground to cover off those key topics. They might not be flagged as this event is for this because it's working on a number of different layers there.
And having those members that are at different stages on the journey, being able to feedback their experiences and lessons learned is absolute gold dust, isn't it?
It is indeed.
That's what we're about is, sharing your knowledge and your learning experience with the other members, and then it becomes that two-way process and that customer experience and ultimately success for our members.
And that's one of the huge value adds, really, is customers sharing their story, warts and all, to help customers that are embarking or at a different stage of their journey to help them through it.
I must admit, Paul, you made me slightly nervous when you were talking about certain individuals that joined SAP as sort of senior managers, and then looking. I know it's hard looking at me. You'd probably think I was only 30, but I joined SAP in the mid-90s when we were worried about something called the year 2000 bug. So I'm showing my age there, and that's how I came into SAP.
Exactly the same for me.
Yeah, it's a common, and actually, if I speak to some of my colleagues, it was exactly the same thing. So you're right, and I do wonder whether we're going to see a replication of that with the S4 journey. We bring in new talent, and they'll take on the mantra for the baton for the next 20 years or so. Another issue that's becoming more important to business, and I'm sure your members, is the environment. What are your plans to address that in 2022. Paul?
So I think Craig mentioned earlier on, we're looking at how we can look at sustainability through the lens of a special interest group. It was a key topic that was discussed. We had an executive forum at the going back to the conference again, but at the conference with McKeel, and probably half of the discussion was around sustainability, and it was interesting listening to people round the table sharing what their organisations were doing and what they were using SAP for in that context. So, there's a huge amount of it's a huge amount of change happening this year and next year in packaging and plastic taxes. And we were talking about that, through to initiatives that people were doing with Concur around discouraging people from flying and getting them to use the train rather than driving and so on. So, we've started to tap into that. It's been a theme and a thought piece around our conference for a few years in terms of living the sustainability piece and trying to improve what we do at that event. But we started on that journey. We've got people involved getting ready to start, our first sustainability focused special interest group this year.
Excellent. And Craig, your views on that?
Yeah, exactly as Paul said, and from an internal perspective, as an organisation, we want to do our bit as well, and we've started work to understand our carbon footprint. We're working with an organisation to help us calculate what that footprint is, then look at how we can reduce our environmental impact and offset the remaining emissions to head to net zero. That's our plan. As Paul mentioned at the conference, we've been reducing. I don't know whether you both remember, but probably 5-6 years ago now, we'd have had a really nice printed conference handbook for everybody that attended. Obviously, we moved that to an online app, and we've been gradually reducing lots of things that were, if you like, damaging to the environment over recent years, and we're just going that step further now. And we'll engage in our own sustainability community as well, if you like.
Now, we've brushed on it several times, but we'd be remiss not to mention last year's Connect conference, and it says last year, it feels like yesterday in some respects. That was one of the very few in-person events I think that I attended and many others did through the year, and I think it was amazing that it ever got to take place, frankly, given the hiatus with COVID. But do you have any plans for more in-person events this year?
Yes, indeed. We have a number of events coming up. It's kind of, the pandemic has enabled us to also serve a different kind of member who thrives in the online environment. It's also helped us identify which of our special interest groups and communities have grown in the online environment and which perhaps have struggled. So when we created our calendar of events for this year, it's a mix of online and face-to-face events. We have some events coming up as we get towards the end of March that will be face-to-face to also align with a number of the online events we'll have already run this year. We also have an analytics symposium, so kind of a larger one-day event that we'll be running face-to-face in early April. I think it's the 5th of April. So we'll be having a mixture of those face-to-face and online offerings as we go through this year. And again, if anybody's interested, they just need to visit sapusers.org/events.
Thank you. And Paul, I guess you've got two hats on in terms of running an IS team and also as chairman. What's your view in terms of those in-person events?
I think, like Craig said, we've got a lot of learning over the year one and year two of the pandemic in terms of what worked well and what didn't work so well. And I think one of the things that we have found is there are a community of people who cannot get out of the office for a day or longer to attend an in-person event. So putting in shorter webinar sessions that people can dip into for an hour in the middle of the day or at the end of the day and get that key bit of learning on a specific topic has been really valuable and has been welcomed by the members. I think pre the conference, I was intrigued to see what happened in terms of where people were and how they felt about the event. And I think, we very quickly saw the value of in-person in terms of those conversations, the networking opportunities, and the ability to ask questions that just doesn't lend itself in a virtual meeting. And, we'll all have attended over the last 2 years some pretty appalling examples of virtual events and some good ones, but it's been really hit and miss as to how well they've worked. So I think it's important. I think sometimes it is difficult to get out of the office for a day. So that ability for, a mixture of online and in person is really important going forward for us.
It certainly is.
I think it's difficult for me. I work in the food industry and, I've been in the lucky position of being able to go to work and sit in an office and go out to factories and so on during the last year or two when, some people were, basically sent home and told to stay at home. And we kept our offices open to help people with their well-being and also being cognizant that 2/3, if not more, of our employees had to go to work because they were making food, and it's not very easy to do that in your kitchen on the scale that we do it.
No, quite. And I think you hit on a really good point because it is the networking. It is the element of, if I was at home, for instance, I wouldn't necessarily think I must speak to so-and-so because they're not at the front of my mind. It's when you're walking around the conference hall and you bump into people and you think, and you then have conversations. There's some real value that's driven from that kind of interaction, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think, we talked earlier on about the work that we'd done on, well-being and supporting people's mental health. And, that was a big push for us, effectively helping the resilience of our community. And I think this year, the way that we'll use our events and maybe even add a few extra things in is about actually re-energizing that community and getting people to realize the value of those things that we've just talked about.
Well, Paul, that's an excellent segue actually into my next question because, we've seen a huge amount of change in the user group over the last 5 years. But how do you see it evolving in the next 3 to 5 years?
We spent a lot of time last year, both as a board and Craig and his team up in Teesside, thinking about the user group. We talked to a lot of members. We talked to the partner community. We spoke to SAP to understand how people viewed us, where they thought we were strong, where they felt we weren't strong. And that's where we've spent time on what our purpose is, what our vision is, how we talk to the community and bring the community together. And that over the next year or so is going to be really important in how we drive it forward. I think we're in the cloud era and, over the next 3 to 4, in that kind of, you're talking about 5-year time window, in the next 5-year time window, there'll be the number of people on premise that were on cloud 6 or 7 years ago. It'll be that it will have completely flipped by then. And that means that the roles that are being undertaken by people, both in a technical function and in a business function, will have changed. And therefore, we're about being able to reflect that. We know that we need to attract more line of business users to the community so that they can share, particularly in an era where, it's quite straightforward to do some of these projects, and I probably get castigated for saying that projects are straightforward, but in terms of where they were a few years ago, they are much more straightforward now, and can almost be user driven rather than a large technical and IT department driving these projects. That we're going to start to see much more pull from the business community, and we need to be addressing that in how we are attracting new members into the organisation, new special interest group chairs, and the types of events we're doing, because that is shifting. So and incumbent on that as well is helping people with their careers in terms of our traditional membership, helping support them as they need to understand that shift in skills and get them to events so they can start to feel that. So I think for me it's going to be a lot in that, and clearly the ICE things are really important along that journey as well.
And a big part of that, like you say, is that one community element, and bringing everybody together in that community, driving growth and engagement within that. We're working with universities and looking to drive that forward on how we get the next generation of SAP talent into the community as well, with students, etc. So there's lots of work there, and we're looking to work with everybody in the world of SAP, so that we can head fast towards our vision of driving success for everyone in the SAP community, but especially and with a special focus on the SAP customers, of course.
As we come to a close, and I am conscious that we're focused here about the UKI SUGs vision in this podcast, but I thought I'd ask if there's anything you've seen in the SAP's plans for this year that you find particularly exciting.
I think from my perspective and the work we've done with SAP, what I've really enjoyed, I think, over the past year and been really pleased about is the engagement, the level of engagement since Michiel Verhoeven joined as SAP UK and Ireland's Managing Director. He has really engaged with us as a community, and that's been really pleasing. And I think from what we're looking for from SAP, that continual transformation of their business, putting the customer at the centre. We've heard lots about that, and what we want to do is see how that develops and ensure and work closely with SAP to enable it to develop and drive more success for the customers, because at the end of the day, we both want the same things. We want happy SAP customers. We want successful SAP customers. SAP wants that. You will know from your perspective in the partner community, you want that, and we want that as a user group.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it was evident. It was evident from Connect. The engagement from Michiel and the and the kind of impact and the change in focus that was present there. So I think that bodes really, really well for the future, and focus on customer success. I think those awards and the focus on them are really, really important. It's all about business outcomes at the end of the day and success.
Yeah,
it's not that long since all the Diageo type things were swirling around in the community around indirect and so on, and the atmosphere, for want of a better description, across the UK and Ireland was quite tough. When we were giving our conference speeches and things like that. I think that we've done a lot to improve the understanding on both sides through the trust workshops of how important some things are to an organisation and how to work together for that success. I think the big thing for me to see develop this year on the SAP side in that is how they have started to talk more about customer success, but also how they're changing the way that they manage and remunerate the account managers around customer success rather than on the big deal. And you know, we'll be, you know, kind of the second year into that and the third year over the next 12 months. And it will be interesting to see how that starts to work in terms of, you know, are people re-signing?
Well, look, thank you, Craig, for allowing me to take the reins of SUGTalks. I know it's your baby. And thank you both for being wonderful guests. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. If you would like further information on the user group, visit sapusers.org or follow us on social media. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening.